Hey guys, I'm here to finally make a wizard guide, as the last one I made is severely outdated and for Ignite Wizard. First off, this guide is for trios gameplay, as that is what I play and what I'm good at. Some of these tips will be good for all group sizes, but the main focus will be for trios. First thing we gotta go over is perks. Just gonna go over the list one by one, explain their use case, and if they'll ever realistically be used. The first perk is Arcane Feedback. Now, this one is probably one of the worst perks that Wizard has access to. You get 2% spellcasting speed and 2% arcane magical damage bonus per stack for 7 seconds, and it can stack up to 5 times. So that's only a 10% bonus to casting speed and arcane magical damage bonus, and it's only for 7 seconds, and you have to hit with magic missiles. It's not good, especially considering you have stuff like Quick Chance and Sage, which basically give the casting speed bonus, but for free. Next is Arcane Mastery. This perk is one of the best that Wizard has. You gain 5% arcane magical damage bonus. It's not very important. It does help, not the main reason to use it, but it reduces the cast time of arcane spells by 0.5 seconds. That doesn't sound like a lot, but the arcane spells are invisibility, magic missile, as well as magic lock, but you don't really use that a whole lot. And the only time you'll ever use invisibility is close range, where every second counts. Next, it also reduces the cast time of Magic Missile, making it near instant, which is really good when fighting against melee characters that get up close to you. Next perk I'm going to go over is Fire Mastery. This perk gives 5% fire magical damage bonus, which is useful, but not the reason you use this. Duration of applied burns are increased by 2 seconds. This doesn't increase the damage, just the duration. And a burn target reduces incoming physical healing by 50%. And incoming magical healing by 50%. This is very useful as a counter to clerics, as they are one of, if not the best classes in the game. For Fire Mastery, the spells that it affects include Zap, Explosion, and Fireball, as well as Ignite, but only when you yourself use it. So if you cast Ignite on your front line, it's not going to apply Fire Mastery unless your front line is another wizard with Fire Mastery. The next perk is Ice Mastery. Dealing damage with ice magic freezes the target's feet and prevents them from moving for 0.5 seconds. This perk is alright, it's a decent one. I don't personally use it. It's probably better for stuff like solos and duos for kiting. And the only ice spell we have currently is Ice Bolts. So maybe in the future with more ice spells, this perk could become better. Next is Ice Shield. This is also one of the best perks in the game, probably, not just on Wizard. You gain 20 armor rating, which is a lot, as you can see here. This is an armor rating build, but with just Ice Shield, I'm gaining 6% physical damage reduction, which is just insane for just a perk. And that's not all it does. It also inflicts Frostbite on melee attackers, causing them to lose 20% move speed and 20% action speed for 0.5 seconds. This really helps when you're trying to stuff somebody with magic missiles, as it slows down their second hit, allowing you to do a lot more damage, and it causes them to do a lot less damage. Also helps when you're getting chased, as it can slow them down and allowing you to get away. The next perk is Mana Surge. It says gain 10% magical damage bonus. Now this sounds good, but you're not really gaining 10%, as it doesn't scale with stats such as true magical damage on your gear and additional magic damage. It does not scale with those, it only scales with the base damage of your spell. So stuff like Zap, where it's only dealing 20 damage, you gain 10%, you're only gaining 2 damage on your Zap, which is really not a whole lot. Stuff like Fireball or Chain Lightning, where you're doing more base damage, it's going to help a little bit more, but it's really not that useful. Next is Melt. When you deal magical fire damage to a target, the target loses 10% physical damage reduction for 5 seconds. This one's not really all that great, as it's only 5 seconds, and it reduces their physical damage reduction, and you deal magical damage, so it's really a support perk, but 10% physical damage reduction is not a whole lot, so it doesn't really help in most situations. Next perk is Quick Chant. Gain 10% spellcasting speed. This is kind of the same perk as Sage, which is gain 10% knowledge bonus, and most always Sage is going to be better than Quick Chant, as I'll show you right here. If I equip Sage, I gain 4 knowledge, which is then giving me basically 10% spellcasting speed. And I'm also gaining the knowledge on top of that for things like memory capacity bonus and also the spell recovery bonus, which allows me to gain spells back quicker when I'm sitting down. While quick chant, all that does is give 10% spellcasting speed. So the only time you'll really use quick chant is if you already have Sage and you want to double down. Next perk is Reactive Shield. When you take damage, gain an arcane shield that lasts for 3 seconds. The shield can absorb 15 total damage and will only reactivate after a cooldown period. Now this perk is kind of the same role as Ice Shield, but Reactive Shield is more for countering ranged characters, as it's really good especially against wizards or warlocks, as it reduces the damage you take from burn effects like Curse of Pain, Zap, or Fireball. I wouldn't really recommend this unless you have enough knowledge. My build kind of has low knowledge, but if I were to run it, I'd take off Sage and run Reactive Shield for a more tanky build. Next perk I'm going to go over is Spell Overload. This reduces memory capacity bonus by 60% and increases all spell counts by 60%. This perk is very good, but also very expensive to build. The only way to build this currently is to have gear with perks such as memory capacity bonus. The reason this is good is because it doesn't scale with the minus 60%. So you can do things like this. I have 17 memory capacity. I throw on plus 8.3% and I gain 4 memory capacity. And that is because when I take off spell overload, this is the stat that it's scaling off of. It's not scaling off of this 21, it's scaling off the previous 45. The final perk is Staff Mastery. When using a staff type weapon, you gain 1 magic weapon damage. This perk allows weapons such as the quarterstaff or the magic staff to scale off of magical damage. It says you gain 1 damage, but what this does is it adds another form of scaling. So this 1 true magic is now going to scale and add on top of that 1, allowing your gear to better increase your melee damage. So if you have things such as Ignite plus a magic staff, then you're going to be scaling 2 times with your additional magic damage, rather than just 1 time when you don't have Staff Mastery on. This can be used sometimes in melee builds, which are not very strong. They do hit very hard, but you're also a wizard who is very squishy. Next, I'm going to go over the skills. This isn't going to take very long because for the most part, you want to run Spell Memory 1 and Spell Memory 2. If you want to run some less meta builds, you can run something like Arcane Shield, which gives you a shield around you that absorbs 20 damage from all damage sources for 12 seconds. When the maximum amount of absorb has been reached, the shield unleashes an arcane explosion, dealing 5 magical damage to enemy targets in a 2-meter radius around you. This damage also scales, as you can see by the 1.0. That means it scales at 100%, which means every 1 damage that you have increases the magical damage by 1. This is a good skill to have, maybe if you want to run Spell Overload. If you run Arcane Shield, you almost always want to have Spell Overload so that you can have enough spells to kill people. Another option is to run Staff Mastery instead of Spell Overload and run a melee build, but I would not recommend this, especially outside of anything but solos. The next skill is Intense Focus. Now this one, again, always want to run with Spell Overload. What it does is it reduces the cast time of your next spell to 0.1 seconds. The thing with this is this does have a cast time, Intense Focus, so you have to use this beforehand to actually get any extra cast time out of it. This is good to surprise people, but once they know you have it, it's a lot easier for them to play around it, so you kind of have one shot with this skill. Last skill to go over is Meditation. This skill is really not good, especially when we have campfires. This can be used if you're lazy, playing like a dead map, farming PvE. You can run Meditation and Spell Overload just so you can get your spells back quicker to clear PvE. But for PvP, I wouldn't really recommend anything but Spell Memory 2 and Spell Memory 1. Next thing we go over is spells. I'm going to go from tier 1 all the way to tier 6. First spell is Zap. This is one of your best spells. It's a really quick cast, solid damage, always a take. Almost no matter what build you go, you're always going to want Zap. Next tier 1 spell is Light Orb. This spell, it's not the worst thing in the world. You don't really get much value out of it. This does remove Invis on rogues, but only rogues. This is a counter to hide. With the recent rogue nerfs to the duration, This really doesn't get much use. It's more useful for lighting up dark areas, and you can take this when you're running something like Spell Overload, as it reduces your memory capacity, as it's only a tier 1 spell. The next spell is Magic Loop. This is going to be the same as Light Orb in its use case. You can use it with Spell Overload as a final perk to reduce your memory capacity if you don't quite have the gear for it. This is very nice as it locks objects, like doors. It even locks chests, which I'm not sure why you would ever do that, but it's very nice when you're getting chased. But characters like Barbarians with Crush, Druids with Bear Form, and Wizards with Fireball / Explosion can still break down the door. The next spell is Slow. This slows the target's move speed bonus by 40% for 2.5 seconds. This is very nice when kiting players, or to save your teammates if they're getting chased and they're slower than the person chasing them. This is also a spell I would recommend to almost always have. In nearly every situation, you can get value out of slow. The next spell is Ignite. This sets the target's weapon on fire. While active, deal 5 magical damage at 50% scaling. This means every 2 magical damage you have, it adds 1 more damage, and it burns enemies as well. This spell goes in the same category as Light Orb and Magic Lock. You can use it while running Spell Overload as an extra spell to keep the memory capacity low, or also there is some good use in it in low gear lobbies to help give your front line a little bit more damage, or if you're running the melee build with Staff Mastery, you can run that as well. And the final thing is also an in-game build with a frontline cleric running Smite, and they can run additional magic damage for scaling on Ignite and Smite. Kind of a niche team comp there, but it does have some usability in that. The next spell is Ice Bolt. This spell is very good and has kind of the same use case as Slow. A little harder to hit though, as it's a projectile, but the projectile is very large. This spell deals 30 magical damage and reduces the target's move speed bonus by 20% and their action speed by 20% for 1 second. This spell is a must take in almost every scenario, especially when you're running 10 spell. Very nice. Now moving on to tier 3, we have Magic Missile. This is one of, if not your best spell in the game. This fires up to 10 homing missiles that each deal 9 magical damage at 75% scaling, but you cannot move while firing them. This is very good as a last resort when melee characters are chasing you down. It is also your highest DPS and almost really the only spell that you should ever be using on PvE. This, you always take it no matter what build you're running. Always have it. The next tier 3 spell is Haste. This is also a very good spell as it grants the target 5 move speed, 10% action speed, 10% spellcasting speed for 8 seconds. This is something that you always want to have casted on yourself going into a fight. If you want to have a front line be in front of you, you always want to cast this on them as well. This is a must take. You should always have haste. Moving on to tier 4 spells, we have Lightning Strike. This spell targets an area, dealing 30 magical damage, and reduces the enemy's move speed bonus by 20% for 1 second. This spell can be casted through targets, which means it's very good when you have a frontline player on your squad, allowing you to cast through them when they're in the way, giving you something to do rather than haste or ignites your teammate. This spell will be taken in most cases if you have a frontline. Otherwise, if you do not have a frontline, it can be replaced with Explosion, which we'll go over later. The next spell is Invisibility. This is a must take as it grants your target 4 seconds of invisibility, and while active, you also gain 5% move speed bonus. This spell, like earlier, when paired with Arcane Mastery, is an instant cast. It's very good for sending in your frontline along with haste and or ignite if you have it. And it's also very good for you to get out of situations where you corner yourself and don't position correctly. But one thing it doesn't say here is every second there's an after image of you so that you're not completely invisible, but you can use these to do some baits and stuff. The next tier 4 spell is Fireball. This is possibly the best spell that you have access to, right up there with Magic Missile. This is your main source of damage in most fights, as a direct fireball does probably the highest damage in the game out of any spells that you have access to. What it does, it shoots a burning fireball, dealing 25 direct magical damage to a target and 10 splash magical damage. Both the splash and the direct damage scale separately, so if you hit a direct, you have double scaling. So you hit the 25 with 100% scaling and the 10 with 100% scaling, plus the burn, which does a lot of damage. Now on the tier 5 spells, we have Explosion. When cast, an explosion occurs in the targeted area after 3 seconds, dealing 25 magical damage and burns targets as well. This spell is what I would replace in an ideal scenario with Ignite, Magic Lock, and Light Orb, so you have both Lightning Strike and Explosion. What Explosion does is it also can stick onto targets, so it's similar to Zap in its use case, as it's a hit scan damage, but it doesn't do instant damage and takes 3 seconds to do anything. Very good spell, just a little weaker than Zap, as it takes 3 seconds to do damage. Now, the final spell is Chain Lightning. Chain Lightning electrocutes the targets, dealing 35 magical damage, and fires lightning that is transferred to targets within an 8-meter area up to 3 times. This spell is very good, but the damage decreases every time it chains. So only the first target is going to take 35 magical damage, and the damage will reduce every target it chains to. This spell is very good at dealing damage to big groups, so this is really only usable and a good use in trios. Outside of that, solos and duos, I wouldn't recommend taking Chain Lightning. This can also be comboed with spells such as Hydra on Warlock and Treant on Druid, so that you have a target to train that is very easily summonable by your teammates, giving you free damage on the enemies. Now, in an ideal world, this is the spell setup that you want to be looking at when running 10 spell, even 10 spell overload. This is what you want. If not, if you have a front line, you can replace Explosion for Ignite, Magic Lock, or Light Orb. If you don't have a front line, I would replace Lightning Strike for the same 3 spells. Next, I want to go over builds. What pieces you should be building and what stats you should be looking for. First, we're going to start with boots. First option you have are Lightfoot boots. These are very good for move speed. We have Occultist boots, which give you knowledge and will for more cast speed, as well as damage, but are slightly slower than Lightfoot boots. We have Rugged boots, which give you HP, but are the same move speed as Occultist boots, making them good for tankier builds. Next are pants. You have leather chouses, which give knowledge, and are also decently fast. And you have heavy leather leggings, which are giving you HP and a lot of armor rating, but are pretty slow for tanky builds. Then you have padded leggings, which are the same as heavy leathers, giving you HP, but are also faster with less armor rating. And then finally, you have loose trousers, which are good for speed builds and should mostly be paired with Lightfoot boots. Then we have gloves versus rawhide gloves, which I wouldn't really recommend using right now, as they give you knowledge, which is good for cast speed, but it gives you resourcefulness, which is kind of a useless stat. Later on, we will have a different option for gloves, which is ruby silver rawhide gloves, which give you the same bonus as Occultist boots with knowledge and will, making them a secondary option alongside reinforced gloves, which give vigor, which are currently the only good option for gloves for wizard in my opinion. And we have chest pieces. Adventurer tunic. This is the worst chest piece I think you could use on wizard that is still viable, as it gives you max health, is very fast, but you have very low armor rating. Then the best option, I think, is Oracle Robe, which gives you high armor rating, gives you magic resist, is decently fast, and gives you knowledge for more casting speed. And then we have Ruby Silver Vestments, which are the same move speed as Adventurer Tunic, but it also gives similar armor and magic resist values as Oracle Robes. These give 5 will as well for magic resist and damage, and the Ruby Silver Vestments, compared to the Mystic Vestments, also gives you 1% physical damage reduction. These are an alright option, but I still recommend the Oracle Robe over the Ruby Silver Vestments. Another option we don't currently have right now is the Golden Robe, which gives you vigor as well as a decent amount of armor rating, but really high magic resist. Then the only option for hats is Leather Cap, which gets 5 vigor, -3 move speed, 23 armor rating, which is fairly decent. Later down the line, we will again have better options, like the Ruby Silver Hood, which is the same stats as the Leather Cap, but slightly better. And then we also have the Golden Leaf Hood, which is the best option for Wizard, as it has slightly lower armor rating than Leather Cap. It has vigor, but it also has magic resist, and just looks cooler. Then for cloaks, you kind of have a lot of options with cloaks, and you kind of want to cover your weaknesses. So say you have a low HP set, you want to go a Vigilant Cloak for vigor. You have a low cast speed set, you want to go Radiant Cloak for knowledge. You can also go a Splendid Cloak for more magic resist or damage. You also have the option of an adventurer cloak, but this is not really recommended as agility is not a great stat for a wizard, as it grants action speed as well as movement speed, which action speed doesn't really affect wizard and is not helpful. Rings and pendants are, well, rings are kind of the same as cloaks. You just want to cover your weaknesses. The same thing applies. Vigor ring, you have will rings, you have agility rings, and you have knowledge rings. This is the same exact scenario as the capes. But the pendants are slightly different, as Phoenix Chokers are going to be your by far the best option for you. These have a base stat of true magical damage, and on pendants, the max you can get is 1 true magical damage, but on pendants, like the Phoenix Choker, you can get up to 4 true magical damage, which is really needed as this nearly doubles the maximum amount of damage that you can get. And now I want to go over the rolls you want to look for on each piece. Now, for boots, the main roll you want to look for is additional move speed and move speed bonus. These are necessary as you need to be faster than the enemy to keep them at the right distance for you to cast spells and not get meleeed. Some alternative good stats are things like Vigor, which give HP, Knowledge for more cast speed, and Max Health, which is the same as Vigor, slightly less. Another option and build you can go for is to not go for any move speed and just go for max health and armor rating, but this is only really viable when you are playing the Bard, Cleric, Wizard comp. Now for pants, good stat you want to look for on almost all your pants is the max health stat, as this can roll up to +6, which is the highest it can roll on any piece, which it can also roll on chest piece and pendant as well. But max health is the most important stat, and the same stats you can look for here as well as boots, stuff like knowledge and vigor, as well as percentage max health bonus. If you want to build a tankier build, like I was saying earlier, with the Bard, Cleric, Wizard, armor rating is also a very, very good stat to look for. Then we have gloves. This is the same thing as boots, minus the move speed. You have knowledge, vigor, armor rating, max health, all very good stats. And then we have Oracle Robe or chest piece, which is going to be the same rules as pants. And then we have the leather cap, which is going to be the same rules as gloves and boots, armor rating, max health, knowledge, vigor. But leather cap also has true magical damage and additional magical damage. You always want to have, at the bare minimum, 1 true magical damage or 1 additional magical damage. This should be the bare minimum rolls. Any cap without it, you should not be using. And then we have Splendid Cloak, which is going to be the same thing as the leather cap, except you cannot roll stats on these, such as vigor and knowledge. These stats only come from the base, whether it be Splendid for will, Vigilant for vigor, or Radiant for knowledge. These also have additional magic and true magic, same thing as the leather cap. If it doesn't have additional magic or true magic, you don't want to use it. And then we go on to the spellbook. Ideal stats to look for are plus flat max HP. So this can roll up to +6. Magical damage bonus, magical penetration, as well as magical power, and max health bonus %. These are all very good stats to look for. I prefer getting 2 max health rolls on my book, but again, you can just cover for your weaknesses. If you're low damage, you can get magical power bonus, but those tend to be more expensive and don't provide as much of a bonus, in my opinion, as max health. And again, with these max health rolls, these only apply when you have the book out, so getting these stats on something like a crystal sword doesn't really matter. And now onto the crystal sword. These stats don't really matter. You're only really going to be using crystal sword against PvE, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. But some good rolls are weapon damage, physical power, stuff like that, as the main source of damage is going to be physical, and you deal very low physical damage. And mobs also have high magical resist, so the most damage you're going to be doing is still going to be with your physical. Next, we're going to go into rings. This is going to be the same thing as capes. You're going to have additional true magic. If it doesn't have it, don't use it. You can also roll max health bonus, but again, no stats, just like the cape. Then we have pendants. You're going to want to go a Phoenix Choker, but if you don't, true magic and additional magic, if it doesn't have it, don't use it. But again, you want to use Phoenix Choker. With Phoenix Chokers, you want to have max health. It's a very important rule. It can roll up to +6. Phoenix Chokers or pendants in general have the same rules as chests outside of the additional and true magical damage, but also does not have stats such as vigor. Now, some quick changes I want to go over if you're running spell overload. The main places you want to get memory capacity bonus are going to be on the pendant, the chest, and the leggings, as they can roll up to 10% memory capacity bonus. Usually if you get all three of these and have a proper amount of knowledge, then you'll be in a good spot and almost there to having 10 spell overload. Now I want to go over the overall stats that you want to look for. This is an ideal set that you want to be looking at when having the correct perks applied. Now this set is for the Bard, Cleric, Wizard comp, so it has slightly different stats compared to others. Knowledge is at 43. This is slightly lower than I'd like, but I have a Bard which makes up for it, bringing it up to the amount that I would normally run, which is around 45 to 50 normally. But with a Bard, you can run 40 to 45 if they're running Storyteller and Rousing Rhythms. Next is the health. A decent kit should have around 120 HP. If you want to have a really good kit, you should have around 140, 150 HP. Next is move speed. I don't have much move speed built. I have a little bit on the boots and no agility, but this is because I'm running Bard, Cleric, Wiz. We don't need to run in this comp. We are very stationary comp and very tanky comp. So move speed doesn't matter, but if you want to build move speed, you go something like Lightfoots, and you either go leather trousers or loose trousers, and then this would be a good amount of move speed to build. Around 310 is very nice. You can get a little bit lower and still be fine, but this is also very good. Now for physical damage reduction. This is not a stat you usually build on Wizard. It is a very good stat to build, but usually you have to sacrifice move speed because to get a high physical damage reduction, you have to run heavy leather leggings, which drops it by quite a bit. So I wouldn't worry about the stat unless you're running Bard, Cleric, Wiz and want to run a slow tanky build. Then I would be looking to 35 to 45% PDR, which is basically what I have. To achieve this, it's very necessary to have Ice Shield equipped. Also, one of the best skins in the game, the Nightmare Skeleton, which increases your armor rating by 10, but reduces your magic resist by 10. This gives quite a large bonus. Next is magic resist. This is again the same case as physical damage reduction. Don't really worry about building it too much. You can go an alternate build. I would usually wait until we have access to the golden robe, which is an alternative chest piece, which gives more magic resist, allowing you to properly build magic resist for that kind of build if you want to do that. But it's going to be the same thing as physical damage reduction. Physical power bonus, you don't want to worry about that. Now magical power bonus, I don't really worry about it too much. It's not that great of a stat. It doesn't increase your damage that much. But if you run something like Occultist Boots and then Ruby Silver Rawhides in the future, you should have enough will to make your magical power bonus not terrible, so you're not losing too much damage. But again, I wouldn't really worry too much about your magical power bonus. And then for damage, you want to make sure you have it, again, on all your jewelry. So you have 1 damage here, 1 here, 1 on cloak, 1 on hat, and then you can have up to 4 on your necklace, which makes a total of 8. 8 is the ideal, but you can get away with running something like 5 if you have either a low rarity Phoenix Joker, that's fine, or something like a necklace apiece with true magical damage, which is the only other necklace I would ever use over a Phoenix Joker. One stat I forgot to go over is spellcasting speed. This is something that kind of goes along with the knowledge, but I prefer it to be upwards of 80% spellcasting speed. Now again, this will change because I have a Bard on the squad, but 80% is the ideal spellcasting speed that you want to go for. Now for the gameplay guide. I want to give a few tips that I've learned since I started playing Wizard back in Playtest 3 over a year ago. First, I'll go over some general tips. This is called jump casting and jump swapping weapons. Whenever you cast spells or swap weapons, you lose some move speed, but if you jump right before casting or swapping weapons, you don't lose that move speed until you touch the ground. This allows you to be a little quicker and it'll save you in a lot of situations. This is something you should learn no matter what class you play. When using this tech, when casting spells, you can also b-hop, so right as you hit the ground, you jump again, keeping your momentum slightly while casting, allowing you to move even further while keeping the same move speed you had before casting the spell. When casting spells, you're slowed, so this means that ranged characters, such as rangers or fighters and bards with crossbows, will aim at you during this time, and most will wait for you to cast a spell as you're an easy target. This can be used and abused. As you start casting a spell, they will go to shoot you, but you can bait this by starting to cast a spell, then canceling it to get a quick burst of speed, to bait out spells or arrows from enemies. Another thing to look out for is hitting your hand on the wall while you're casting. This will mostly only happen if you have a wall to your right, but if you're standing back to the wall and you try to cast a spell, you will hit your hand, so be careful of that. This means that when peeking a doorway, you want to be on the left side so that your hand is in the open on the right. This allows you to cast your spells slightly quicker than if you were on the other side of a doorway. This will give you an advantage when fighting versus other wizards or really anybody, allowing you to cast your spells quicker and having to peek out less. Now on to some more specific tips versus a couple classes. When you're versing a rogue, you have to use your teammates as bait to get him to use cutthroat or ambush, or you can move in a way that you're surrounded by your teammates, like a front line in front and then a cleric behind, or a bard or anybody behind you that can also support you to make the rogue either not want to dive you, or if he does dive you, he will die. When versing warlocks and druids, you want to make sure to save lightning strikes and fireballs for when you can force them to phantomize. As for warlocks, it does more damage and it's the only thing that can damage them, and the same thing for druids, although it doesn't do extra damage. And some main tips when versing a wizard, as this is a very important matchup and a lot of team fights are decided by the wizards. When versing a wizard, close range, the first wizard to magic missile first wins that engagement, but you can kind of counter this to where if you know he's going to get the magic missile off first, you can charge a fireball. That way he has to either stop casting magic missiles or you can direct fireball him, which is a huge amount of damage. Also, to avoid the magic missiles while you're casting this fireball, or if you don't have a chance to, you want to start strafing in one direction, and then once he starts catching up to you, you can see him turn. As he's trying to follow you, he'll jump ahead a little bit. At this point, you want to jump back the other way. This will make it so you only get hit by 1 or 2 magic missiles, and is the #1 way to avoid missiles without a shield. Next, I'm going to go over individual tips for spells. The main spell I made a lot of tips for is Fireball, as it's one of the most important. This is your main damage. You need to have value out of your fireballs. This is not something you should be using for poke. This is something you should be using when you're going for a kill. You can also use fireballs to cancel cleric's channeled spells like Earthquake and Sanctuary to stop healing or to stop the movement reduction. Also, along with this, fireballs can damage and knock back through walls and ceilings, allowing you to cancel Sanctuaries and Earthquakes or to apply damage and or Fire Mastery Burn. With fireballs, high ground is really good, making it near impossible to miss fireballs because this allows you to angle the fireball to where if you don't hit the direct, you will still splash them. And you can use this with even just a little bit of high ground. Next is one little tip for Lightning Strike. When playing a front to back comp, like a front line in front of you in a small corridor, Lightning Strike is a great spell to use for free damage, as you can cast it through targets. Some tips for Explosion along with Lightning Strike is Lightning Strike and Explosion are great poke spells, as getting value is good, but it's not really needed unless the enemy outgears you by quite a bit or you miss a lot of your main spells. When chasing players, a good use for Explosion is to blow down doors, as it's not as useful as Fireball, and it also still breaks down doors. You can also use Fireballs, but it's a very useful spell in other situations, so I would try to avoid that. Some tips for Magic Missile, another very important spell. Playing doorways paired with a front line is the deadliest combo you can have as a wizard. In a doorway, if a team is trying to push, combo with a front line blocking the door while you have a funnel to magic missile is near impossible to push and survive when executed correctly. When magic missiling versus shield users, aim for the feet, as it's hard to block, forcing fighter to crouch with shield raised to avoid damage, allowing you to kite and or deal damage. Versus buckler, you can easily hit their feet no matter what, unless they are close range, in which they can block your hand, stopping your magic missile cast. When using Magic Missile, it's okay to stop casting to avoid taking damage while still dealing damage, especially against a War Maul, as if you get hit, you'll get slowed, allowing the Barbarian or Cleric to get more hits on you. One little tip for Chain Lightning. Chain Lightning is good, but situational. You can't cast if you're on a close corner, as if there's a front line in the other team, they can use either Sprint or Rage to get close to you quickly, making it so that if you Chain Lightning, you either chain your whole team, or you don't have any spells to cast when they are on you because you canceled your Chain Lightning. Some tips for Slow. Slow is good if you can hit it while kiting. You cast Slow and then a quick damage spell like Zap, Ice Bolts, or magic missile if you're going for the kill and they're not full health, and then you do the same process over and over again until they're dead. One little tip for haste is you need to always haste yourself before the fight for faster casting speed and movement speed. This is very helpful in wizard versus wizard fights. One tip for invis. Invis is good to gain space, but the enemy will always pre-fire a door when they hear an invis, so wait to go through a door after invis to bait out spells and arrows. So, you made it to the end. I hope my video will help make you a better wizard player, whether you're brand new or are trying to improve your skills.